There are nights when a simple dinner turns into the kind of story people whisper about for years, the kind of story that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about someone. Tonight was one of those nights. Imagine a bustling Friday evening inside a crowded train station food court in Chicago. Voices blending, trays clattering, the smell of fried chicken mixing with hot pretzels and coffee. Families and workers on their way home filled the place. No one expected what was about to unfold, least of all the quiet man wiping down a table in the corner while his teenage son scrolled through his phone. He wasn't rich, not powerful, not someone anyone would notice. In fact, just minutes earlier, he had been humiliated in front of everyone. The manager of the food court. Slick hair, expensive suit, a man who loved to remind others of his authority, had pointed at him and sneered. "Hey janitor, you missed a spot. Do your job right for once. People eat here, not pigs." Laughter from a nearby table followed, cruel and sharp. The man didn't answer. He just nodded, shoulders stiff, quietly scrubbing the stain while his son clenched his fists in silent anger. To everyone else, he looked like a man beaten down by life, invisible, too ordinary to matter. They didn't know his name was Daniel Cole. They didn't know that before becoming a single father working double shifts to keep the lights on, he had been something else entirely. Something dangerous. And then it happened. A scream cut through the chatter. People turned toward the far side of the food court, where a young woman in a red coat was cornered against the tiled wall by two men in black jackets. Their movements were sharp, rehearsed, predatory. One pressed a hand against her shoulder while the other leaned in close, whispering words that made her face drain of color. They weren't drunk strangers. They moved with too much confidence, too much purpose. This wasn't random harassment, it was targeted. Within seconds, the cheerful chaos of the food court shifted into a tense silence. Parents grabbed their children. A group of college kids froze mid-bite, unsure whether to film or flee. Even the security guard stationed near the escalators hesitated, eyes darting between his radio and the scene unfolding. Everyone felt it, that creeping realization that something bad was about to happen, and nobody wanted to be the one to step forward. Nobody, except Daniel. At first, no one noticed him move. He set down his rag, murmured something to his son, "Stay here, don't move," and walked toward the confrontation. His steps were calm, deliberate, but there was a strange weight to them, as if every inch of the ground was familiar territory. The two men noticed him and smirked, mistaking him for just another fool who didn't know better. "Keep walking, janitor." One of them spat, the word dripping with contempt. The young woman's eyes widened, silently pleading for help, but the crowd stayed frozen, waiting for someone else to intervene. That's the thing about moments like these. Everyone hopes a hero will appear, but no one expects it to be the man they just laughed at. Daniel stopped just a few feet away. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might back down. But then something changed. His posture shifted barely, subtly, and suddenly he wasn't the invisible janitor anymore. There was a steel in his eyes, a razor's edge in the way his shoulders squared. Before anyone could blink, the scene erupted. 15 seconds. That's all it took. 15 seconds of fluid, bone-rattling precision. A wrist twisted until bone cracked. A throat strike that sent a man gasping to his knees. A brutal sweep of the leg that slammed the second attacker flat onto the tile. Gasps rippled through the food court, trays clattering to the floor as people stumbled back in shock. No one had ever seen anything like it outside of a movie, and yet here it was, unfolding in front of them, real and raw. When it was over, Daniel stood alone in the middle of the floor, breathing steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The two attackers lay groaning on the ground, disarmed, defeated, humiliated. The young woman clutched her purse, trembling but safe. And the crowd stared in disbelief. Some whispered, some filmed, some just tried to process how the janitor they mocked a minute ago had dismantled two trained predators in less time than it took to boil an egg. And then came the voice that shattered the silence. "Dad!" It was his son, stepping forward with wide eyes, pride mixing with shock. "They don't know, do they?" Daniel didn't answer, but the boy's next words carried across the stunned food court. "He's not just a janitor. He was Army Special Forces. Gasps followed. The laughter, the contempt, the sneers from earlier. All of it evaporated. Now, every eye in the room saw Daniel Cole not as a nobody, but as something else entirely. A protector, a survivor, a man with a past he clearly didn't want to talk about. And that's the moment everything changed. Because as the sirens grew louder outside and the woman whispered, "They'll come back for me," Daniel realized this wasn't over. The attackers weren't random, and the woman wasn't just a victim. She carried secrets that could unravel everything he had tried to bury. Secrets that would drag him and his son back into a world he swore he left behind. And the real story was only beginning. The food court slowly returned to its rhythm, but for Daniel Cole, nothing about that night would ever feel normal again. People whispered as he guided his son, Alex, away from the chaos. Phones had captured everything. The takedown, his name, even Alex's revelation about his past. By the time they stepped into the cold Chicago air, Daniel could feel the weight of eyes, not just curious ones, but dangerous ones. He had lived in shadows for years, blending into a world that barely noticed janitors. And now, with a single decision to act, he had lit a flare that could be seen for miles. Daniel's routine life had been built on purpose. 5 years earlier, after losing his wife, Marissa, in a tragic car accident, he walked away from his unit in the Special Forces. He had medals in a shoebox, scars on his shoulders, and ghosts that visited in the middle of the night. But none of it mattered compared to the small boy who had clutched his hand at the funeral and asked, "You're not leaving me too, right, Dad?" That single promise defined every step since. Daniel traded combat boots for work boots, missions for mop buckets, war zones for late-night algebra homework. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. The janitorial job at Union Station was steady, if humiliating at times. Daniel endured the sneers of commuters and the careless insults from managers because it paid the bills, and because Alex deserved stability. Every morning, he woke at 5:30, brewed cheap coffee, packed Alex's lunch, and caught the train downtown. His co-workers knew him as quiet, dependable, a man who never complained. No one asked questions, and he offered no answers. In the suburbs of Oak Park, neighbors saw only a single father trying to raise his teenage son with decency. They didn't know about the calluses on his knuckles or the reflexes that never dulled. Alex, 14, carried his mother's smile and his father's fire. Bright, restless, a little too sharp for his age. He often bristled at how the world looked down on his father. Teachers would whisper about the janitor's kid. Classmates joked about hand-me-down sneakers, but Alex knew more. He had glimpsed the man his father used to be. The framed photo hidden in the closet, Daniel in fatigues, medals pinned to his chest, flanked by men who looked like brothers. Alex wanted to shout it to the world, to make them see his father's worth. But Daniel always hushed him. "Son, it's not who I was that matters. It's who I am to you now." Still, the boy's pride leaked out in moments like the food court, when fear and admiration collided. Daniel couldn't blame him. Alex deserved to believe his father was more than the world gave him credit for. But pride was dangerous. Pride attracted attention. And attention was exactly what Daniel had spent years avoiding. That night, as they sat in their small apartment above a laundromat, Daniel replayed every detail. Who were the men? Why target the woman in the red coat? And why did her whispered words, "They'll come back for me," linger like smoke? Alex peppered him with questions, eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, you were amazing. The way you flipped that guy, it was like a movie. Everyone saw it. They know now. They know who you really are." Daniel shook his head, his voice low but firm. "No, Alex, they don't know me, and we're going to keep it that way." But fate had other plans. 2 days later, the woman appeared again. Her name was Elena Marquez, a journalist with a reputation for digging into stories that powerful men wanted buried. She found Daniel during his lunch break, sitting alone with a thermos of soup. Her eyes carried the same fear as that night, but now there was urgency too. "Those men, they weren't random. They work for someone dangerous, someone who's been watching me. I saw what you did, and I know you don't want attention, but I need your help." Daniel's instinct was to walk away. He owed her nothing. Every part of him screamed to keep his head down, to protect Alex above all else. But as she spoke, about corruption, about files she had uncovered, about soldiers who died because of defective equipment supplied by a powerful corporation, Daniel felt the old world clawing at him. It was the kind of truth men killed to hide. And suddenly, Elena's fear made sense. She wasn't just unlucky. She was marked. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by Alex's bedroom door, watching his son breathe peacefully, headphones still tangled around his neck. He thought of Marissa, of the promise he made, of the quiet life he tried to build. But he also thought of Elena's trembling hands, of the way the attackers moved like professionals, of the long list of names she claimed were already silenced. Daniel had seen enough cover-ups, enough betrayal, to know she was telling the truth. And if she was right, walking away didn't guarantee safety. It only delayed the inevitable. The next morning, Alex found his father at the kitchen table, staring at a notebook filled with sketches, numbers, plans. It wasn't janitorial work. It was strategy. Alex froze, sensing something monumental shifting. "Dad, you're going back, aren't you?" Daniel didn't answer at first. He looked at his son, really looked, and whispered, "I don't want to, but sometimes, son, the fight finds you, even when you run." And so the foundation was laid. The ordinary life Daniel built was cracking piece by piece. His secret past, the dangerous enemies circling, the woman whose truth connected too closely to his own history. All of it converged. For years, he had been invisible. But now Daniel Cole was visible again. And the world would soon remember why men like him were feared. The following week was supposed to be ordinary. Daniel clung to that hope with a stubbornness that only fathers understand. He woke Alex at dawn, made scrambled eggs, packed his lunch, and tried to laugh at the boy's sarcasm about cafeteria pizza. On the surface, life looked normal again. But beneath, Daniel felt the tremor of something approaching. Old instincts sharpened, and every sound in the train station seemed louder. Every glance from a stranger lingered a second too long. He had learned long ago to trust those instincts. They never lied. Elena Marquez didn't stay quiet either. She texted Daniel twice that week, short messages. "They're still watching me. And later, if something happens, promise me you'll look at the files." Daniel ignored them, convincing himself that distance would keep him safe. But guilt gnawed at him. She wasn't reckless. She was desperate. And desperate people didn't last long against the kind of men she was up against. It was Thursday evening when the storm broke. Union Station at rush hour was a sea of motion. Business suits flowing like rivers, commuters clutching phones, the metallic roar of trains arriving and departing. Daniel was mopping near the West Concourse when he noticed the shift. Movement that didn't belong. 3 men in dark coats spread through the crowd, eyes locked on one figure. Elena, standing alone near the departure board, nervously tapping her phone. His chest tightened. It was happening again. The first man reached her before anyone noticed. He leaned in, lips moving quickly, and Elena froze. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't scream. These weren't street thugs, they were professionals, and their calmness was more terrifying than violence. The second man adjusted his jacket, and Daniel caught a glimpse of something metallic at his waist. A weapon. In a train station filled with thousands, Daniel's mop clattered against the bucket. Alex, waiting nearby with his backpack, saw his father's face harden in that way he had come to recognize. The look that meant danger was no longer optional. "Dad?" the boy whispered. Daniel's answer was sharp, quiet. "Stay close. Don't move until I say." The crowd began to thin around Elena, commuters sensing tension without knowing why. Fear spread like static. A security guard lifted his radio, but hesitation locked him in place. And in that hesitation, Daniel moved. He crossed the distance in seconds, slipping through the tide of people with deceptive ease. The first man grabbed Elena's arm, starting to steer her toward the side exit. That's when Daniel's hand clamped down on his wrist, twisting with surgical precision. The man gasped, body folding, And before the crowd could process, Daniel pivoted. An elbow strike to the second man's sternum, a fluid kick sweeping his legs out from under him. People screamed. Phones shot up. Chaos erupted. But Daniel wasn't focused on the crowd. His eyes locked on the third man, who had drawn a pistol, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed. Daniel grabbed a metal tray from a nearby food cart and flung it with perfect aim. The tray struck the man's wrist, the gun clattering to the floor. In a blur, Daniel tackled him, disarming him with the kind of force that came from years of training. 15 seconds. Again. And yet, this time, the aftermath was different. Police surged into the concourse, weapons drawn, shouting orders. But the attackers weren't panicked. As they were dragged up, one of them spat words that made Daniel's blood run cold. "This isn't over, Cole. He knows you're alive." The crowd murmured. Cameras zoomed in. His name, his past, exposed in one careless threat. Daniel's pulse hammered, not from exertion, but from realization. Whoever sent these men wasn't just after Elena anymore. They had just put a target on his back, and by extension, Alex's. Elena, shaking, grabbed his sleeve. "You can't run from this. They'll keep coming until I'm silenced. Until you are too." Her eyes burned with urgency, but Daniel barely heard her. He was already scanning for Alex. His son stood frozen, clutching his backpack, eyes wide with both terror and awe. For the first time, Alex saw not just his father, but the world chasing him. That night, their apartment felt smaller, suffocating with tension. Daniel locked the doors, checked the windows twice, sat in the dark with his old sidearm resting on the table. Alex broke the silence. "Dad, they knew your name. Who are they? What did you do?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to lie to protect his boy with ignorance. But Alex deserved more than shadows. "They're part of something bigger," Daniel admitted. "A corporation that supplies the military. I found things once, things that cost lives. And I buried it because I wanted a life with you." He looked at his son, voice breaking. "But the past doesn't stay buried, son. Not when people like them are still pulling strings." Elena arrived later that night, bruised but unbroken. She laid out a flash drive, her hand trembling. "These are the files. Names, dates, contracts. Proof that Meridian Industries sold defective armor that killed dozens of soldiers. Including people you knew, Daniel. This is why they're hunting me. And now you." Daniel stared at the drive, torn between fury and fear. He saw ghosts of fallen brothers, men who trusted their gear, men who didn't come home. He also saw Alex asleep in the next room, the boy he promised to protect. The two worlds collided, impossible to separate. That's when Elena whispered the line that cut through his hesitation. "Captain Harris died because of it. Your old commander. He tried to expose them before me, and they silenced him." The room went silent. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Captain Harris wasn't just a commander. He was the man who pulled Daniel from a burning Humvee. The reason Daniel lived long enough to hold his son again. If Harris died because of the same corruption, then Daniel's silence was more than cowardice. It was betrayal. The choice was no longer about protecting himself. It was about honoring the dead, protecting the living, and proving to his son that integrity meant more than fear. And so, as the city lights flickered outside, Daniel made a decision he swore he never would. He would fight again. Not for medals, not for recognition, but for truth and for Alex. Because the threat was no longer approaching. It was here, and it would not stop until he faced it head-on. The city didn't sleep the night after Union Station. News anchors replayed shaky phone footage of Daniel dismantling 3 armed men in seconds. Online forums speculated about his past. Some called him a vigilante, others whispered military, maybe CIA. For Daniel, the worst part wasn't the headlines, but the truth. His cover was gone. The anonymity he had lived under for years shattered in a single confrontation. And the enemy moved quickly. 3 nights later, Daniel sensed it before it began. The subtle hum of an idling engine outside his apartment. The shadow of a man standing too long at the corner. The faint static on his old military radio, one he hadn't touched in years, but now pulsed with interference. They had found him. He had one chance to take control before they took everything. He woke Alex at midnight, his voice calm but urgent. "Pack your bag. We can't stay." The boy didn't argue. He had learned to trust the tone in his father's voice. Elena was already waiting downstairs, her car engine running. Flash drive clutched in her trembling hand. They pulled away just as headlights flared behind them. Black SUVs, windows tinted, engines growling like predators. The chase was brutal. Chicago streets blurred, horns blaring as Elena weaved through traffic. Daniel leaned out the window, eyes scanning, calculating. The men weren't amateurs. They herded, cut off, forced them toward the industrial district where fewer witnesses remained. Daniel's pulse steadied, his mind slipping into the cold clarity of combat. "Keep driving," he ordered. "Don't stop no matter what." When the first SUV rammed their bumper, Daniel moved. He climbed onto the roof mid-drive, gripping the cold metal as wind whipped his face. The attackers didn't expect that. In one fluid motion, he leapt onto the pursuing vehicle, shattering the windshield with his boot. The driver swerved, panicked, and the SUV slammed into a concrete barrier, sparks flying as metal screamed. Daniel rolled off, landing hard but running before the wreck settled. Two more remained. Elena's car screeched around a corner, but one SUV cut them off, blocking the path. Armed men spilled out, rifles raised. The streetlights glinted off steel, their shouts echoing, "Hand over the files." Daniel stepped forward, alone, no hesitation. "You want her," he growled. "You go through me." What followed was chaos orchestrated like symphony. Daniel moved like water, each strike precise, devastating. A rifle yanked free, but slammed into a jaw. A knife hand strike collapsed a trachea. He turned weapons into extensions of his body, flipping one attacker over the hood, disarming another with a snap of the wrist. Bullets sparked against metal, but Daniel never slowed. His world narrowed to survival, to keeping Elena and Alex alive. 15 seconds turned to 30. 30 into a full minute of bone and sweat and fire. When it ended, bodies littered the asphalt. Groaning, broken, none dead but none willing to rise. Daniel stood panting, blood at his temple, shirt torn, but eyes fierce. He had sent a message. He wasn't hiding anymore. But the battle wasn't done. The last SUV roared forward, slamming into Elena's car. Airbags exploded. Alex screamed. Daniel's heart clenched as he sprinted forward, wrenching open the crushed door. Elena was dazed, blood on her forehead, but alive. Alex scrambled out, shaken but unhurt. Behind them, the SUV door opened slowly, and out stepped the man responsible. Victor Morrow, CEO of Meridian Industries. Immaculate suit, silver hair, eyes like ice. He wasn't supposed to be here, not on the streets, but his arrogance was legendary. He smiled coldly, hands clasped behind his back. "You should have stayed invisible, Cole. You had a quiet life. Nobody cared about you. Now you've signed your death warrant and dragged your boy into it." Daniel's fists clenched. "You sold lies that killed soldiers. You killed Harris. You think I'll let you bury this too?" Victor smirked. "Soldiers are expendable. Fathers too. The world doesn't remember ghosts." The words lit something in Daniel he had buried for years. Fury, honor, the promise he made to his son. He lunged. The fight wasn't graceful now. It was raw, desperate. Two men locked in a brutal struggle on cracked pavement. Victor fought like someone who had trained, but Daniel fought like someone with nothing left to lose. Every strike carried the weight of fallen brothers. Every block the force of a father refusing to break. Finally, with a roar, Daniel pinned him against the SUV, forearm crushing his throat. "The world will remember, starting now." He slammed Victor to the ground, yanking the flash drive from Elena's hand, shoving it into the security camera still rolling above the street. The entire fight had been recorded, streamed to the police monitoring center. There would be no burying it this time. Sirens wailed in the distance, closer and closer. Victor's men scattered, dragging their broken bodies away. Daniel stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, Alex clutching his arm, Elena steadying herself at his side. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt alive, seen. When the police arrived, Daniel didn't resist. He gave his statement, handed over the files, and watched as Victor was led away in cuffs, still shouting threats that rang hollow now. Justice wasn't instant, but the truth was no longer hidden. The seed was planted, and Meridian's empire was already crumbling. Later, as dawn broke over the skyline, Alex looked up at his father with eyes full of pride. "You always told me to keep my head down," he said softly. "But maybe some people aren't meant to hide." Daniel ruffled his son's hair, exhausted but smiling. "Maybe you're right, kid. Maybe it's time we stopped running." And with that, the janitor nobody respected became the man everyone remembered. Not because he wanted glory, but because he refused to let fear define him. The city woke to headlines that couldn't be ignored. Meridian Industries CEO arrested in corruption scandal. Whistleblower files expose military cover-up. Unknown father saves son, unmasks conspiracy. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer buried under layers of money and power. News anchors replayed Daniel's street fight on loop, dissecting every frame. Some called him a hero, others called him reckless. But the people, ordinary citizens tired of lies, saw something else. They saw courage. Meridian stock collapsed within hours. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Former soldiers who had been silenced came forward, testifying, adding weight to the avalanche that crushed Victor Moro's empire. The man who once spoke with untouchable arrogance now sat in a prison cell, stripped of power, awaiting trial. But for Daniel, the victory wasn't on the front page. It was at his kitchen table weeks later. The apartment was quieter now. Elena sat across from him, sipping coffee, her face still lined with exhaustion but her eyes steadier. Alex was doing homework, earbuds in, humming to music. For once, there was no shadow of danger looming outside the window. Daniel broke the silence. "You don't have to stay," he said softly. "You got what you needed. The files are public, the world knows the truth. You're free." Elena looked at him for a long time before answering. "Free?" She shook her head. "No one's ever free when they're alone. You didn't just save me, Daniel. You reminded me why the truth matters. Why people fight even when they're outnumbered." Her voice softened. "And Alex, he deserves to see his father for who he really is." Daniel's throat tightened. For years he had hidden the soldier, the protector, behind the mask of a janitor. He thought invisibility would keep his son safe. But Alex's eyes told him otherwise. The boy didn't want a ghost. He wanted a father who stood tall, even when the world tried to break him. Later that night, Alex asked quietly, "Dad, are we going back to hiding?" Daniel knelt, looking into his son's eyes. "No, we're done hiding. From now on, we face things. Together." The words settled like an oath, not just between father and son, but between past and future. Weeks passed. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. Daniel still cleaned floors, Elena still lived with scars, and Alex still wrestled with questions. But something fundamental had shifted. Daniel wasn't invisible anymore, not to his son, not to himself. He had chosen truth over fear, action over silence. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the course of everything. As the camera pulls back, the three of them are seen walking down a quiet street at dawn. The city is waking, traffic stirring, sunlight spilling across the skyline. Daniel's arm rests over Alex's shoulders, Elena walking beside them. No sirens, no shadows, just a man, a boy, and a woman who refused to surrender. A voiceover rises. Daniel's voice, steady, reflective. "They called me a ghost, said I didn't matter, but I've learned something. It doesn't take fame or power or money to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is standing up once for the people you love. And when you do, the world remembers." Fade to black, silence for a beat. Then the words appear, "No one is invisible forever. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Daniel's journey." His story is a reminder that courage and truth are never invisible, and neither are you. But now I'd love to hear from you. What does this story make you reflect on in your own life? Have you ever faced a moment where speaking up or standing strong felt like the hardest thing to do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might inspire someone else who's listening right now. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with a friend who values resilience, and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey we explore together. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together we can turn these reflections into a community of change. Until next time, stay bold, stay true,